All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome back. Again, if you are interested in sponsoring, you can email us at info@ejsny.org. Tonight's class is dedicated to Refuah Shleima for Chana Bat Sima Fega, Shisha Refuah Shleima, Refuah Nefesh, Refuah Guf. Okay, so we heard two classes already tonight on Pesach. The point of the get in the zone is just like players in a game prepare two different ways for their big night. They prepare physically and they prepare psychologically. They prepare physically by going out and doing the exercise, the drills beforehand. And psychologically, you'll often see players before a game listening to music, getting in the zone, doing some breathing exercises. And that's what we're doing tonight. Tonight is the breathing exercises, right? The whole week will be a week of exercising your space, making sure all the chametz is burnt out of your lives. And hopefully tonight, with the rest of the classes and the class that we're already given, you'll have an opportunity to kind of like prepare the mind. I want you to know it was very difficult for me to prepare something for tonight. I find that I try really hard to share ideas that are different from the years before. And when you're a teacher and you teach audiences for a long time, you kind of find yourself bumping into the same old ideas. And tonight is an idea that I'm sure you're familiar with, but I want to drill down on it, and I want to expand on it a little bit, just because of what I see happening from a psychological health perspective. There was an article that was it was an op-ed piece in the New York Times. If anyone wants it, I'm happy to share it with you. I have it over here. I can't read a lot of the words that were written in this piece because they're inappropriate for Torah time, and I don't want to be banned, but I'll change some of the words over here. It just says straight people need better rules for, and if it says over here, I'm going to do this, okay, mechila, all right, this is for mature audiences, okay. There has been a tremendous amount of Pew studies that were done over the last 10 to 20 years on the psychological health of Americans, and specifically with young people. There was a study that was published in the Journal of Marriage and Family. This was actually a lot of these two sheets. When you see me going here, this is my ChatGPT research. Okay, ChatGPT, find me research that talks about the marriage rates in the United States. So a study published in the Journal of Marriage and Family in 2021 found that the proportion of young adults aged 18 to 34, right, who are currently married, decreased from 29% in 2008 to 22% in 2018. This is all before COVID, right? There's a decrease of people getting married over the last, from 2008 to 2018. I imagine those numbers are way worse today. And interestingly, when it comes to some of these numbers, there's no new studies that came out since COVID. They're very few. Here's another one. Pew Research says that young adults ages 18 to 44, right, who have never been married, has increased from 22% in 2000 to 35% in 2018. A 35% increase of people in that particular age group, 18 to 44, who have never been married, has increased from 22% to 35%, which is good news for people that are single, because there's more single people out there, right? But it's bad news for marriages, because what we ultimately want is we want people to be married. There's another study in the National Bureau of Economic Research found that there's a decline in marriage rates driven by labor market opportunities for men. So if we're going through a recession and a tremendous amount of inflation, that will also put more pressure on people not to get married in the next 2 to 3 years. 2019, this study was done earlier, but it was published in 2019. A study by the Institute of Family and Studies found that young adults who place high value on financial stability, personal autonomy, are more likely to delay marriage or remain unmarried. I can't tell you how many guys tell me, Rabbi, I can't date until I have $1 million in the bank, and I say, good luck, you're never getting married. Not because you won't make your money, because by that point, no girl will want you anymore. Your priorities are messed up. There was another set of studies that were done. Okay, this is by in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology in 2019. It says that the rates of depression among young adults ages 18 to 25 has increased by 63% between 2009 and 2017. These are scary numbers. The American Psychological Association 2021 stressed that stress in America, right, the Generation Z, ages 18 to 24, have the highest level of stress and symptoms of depression compared to any other age group in the United States of America. That's crazy. A survey conducted by the National Institute of Health in 2020 found that nearly 1 in 5 young adults, 18 to 24, reported symptoms of anxiety and depression during COVID. Last study over here, ready? This is the study of Journal of Adolescence and Health in 2019 found that the rates of depression and suicidal ideation among college students in the United States have increased over the past decade by more than 64%. These are terrifying numbers. So when I read this, I'm terrified. Like, this is the culture, our society, it's our America, this is the place that we live, it's the place that we play. And so much of our environment has a tremendous impact on us. And I'm sharing these numbers because we have to be mindful, like we're less than 2 weeks away from one of the most powerful nights of the Jewish year. Pesach isn't just a story of Pesach, the mouth that's speaking all night, but it's here for the Haggadah to tell a story. And the story is about something called the Seder. The Seder means order, right? We're trying to bring order into a world of chaos. That's what this is. The Seder isn't just a story about the Jewish people who left slavery and we made it out of these 10 amazing miracles that reshaped our way of looking at the world, culminating with the splitting of the sea, entering into the desert and having these years of manna and water and cloud and so on and so forth. That's not what the story is about. The story is about how a group of people were living in a society where they had no rights. They had no freedom. They did not have the ability to make choices. They were unable to express their own wants. That their lives were an expression of their master's wants and will. That their reality was an expression of a world that was bent on power and control. That was Egyptian society, right? Master, servant. You had the patricians and you had the plebs. You had the upper class, you had the lower class. The lower class had to submit their will to the higher class. But now for the first time, you have a group of people that find this thing called freedom. What do they do with it? How do they express it? And this country has gone through all kinds of revolutions. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. But in this article, in this op-ed piece in the New York Times, it basically talks about the challenges of dating in the United States. This was written about a year ago. And it talks about the challenges of intimacy with this young generation, right? That these rates of depression and isolation, that there are more and more people that just rather be single than be married, that most people don't even know how to engage with other people anymore. There's no more boundaries in the world that you and I live in. And this creates a tremendous amount of negative psychological pressure on everybody. And this is a weird kind of thing because on the one hand, I always imagine that the more freedoms you have, the happier and more successful you'll be in life. And what I'm seeing right now at this part of society, that's not even true. Now think about it. If you're an Egyptian slave leaving Egypt, okay, and you finally have freedom to do whatever you want, what would you do with your newfound freedom? Would you keep a Shabbat? Would you keep a kosher? Would you stop doing the things that your culture presented itself as being the cool thing to do, like worshiping idols? Like, think about that for a second. How hard was it to move from, well, I'm a slave here, and now I'm finally free. Well, what does freedom really mean? And we often think that freedom just means, well, I can do whatever I want to do. And that's where real happiness will come from. That's where I could pursue my happiness. And Pesach is here to remind us that is not true. We're lucky that we're living in a time, I think, we're lucky that we're living in a time in our history where we're watching how this extreme culture of do whatever you want to do, that there are no truths. Be whatever you want, boy, girl, however old you want to be, whatever your age is, your gender, it doesn't really matter. You could choose whatever you want. There are no boundaries anymore. In a world where there are no boundaries, you think that people would be happier, but we find that in a world with no boundaries, people are less happy. We find that intimacy between couples is suffering today because there are no boundaries anymore. Whatever happens on the internet, what people are looking at, no boundaries with their phone, no boundaries. In the world that we live in has no boundaries. And what mental health professionals are telling us today is that in a world with no boundaries, we end up destroying society. So if you and I were building a society for the first time, and we were taking people that were enslaved, a low class of people, and we wanted to give them this and the ability to express their newfound freedom, what would we tell them? Go party tonight, right? Like it's 1999, right? What do you say to them? So Moshe says something different, right? He says something different. And I really believe that the Seder itself is this concept, it's this reminder that in order for us to find meaning in a world of insanity, you got to bring order to your lives. You can't have Seder without boundaries. You can't have order without having a clear understanding of where your beginning, middle, and end is. And therefore, when we look at the Haggadah itself, the story that we're telling, right? It starts off with this idea of halach ma'aniya, which is an interesting declaration, a declaration that basically says that I'm inviting strange guests to my house, and the whole thing is a sketch. It's not even true. There's no one coming. You're in your house already. The invitation wasn't sent out. You're making a declaration in your home. You're reading it in Aramaic. You're saying it in Aramaic. People around you don't even understand Aramaic. It's some cryptic invitation. Why are we making that invitation? It's a weird way to begin. The Haggadah begins with us asking people to join us for a meal, and yet there's no one there. And for me, this chat GBT thing is really cheating for me. I asked it, I said, give me a list of 10 jokes the way Jerry Seinfeld will tell jokes about Passover. So this is one of them. Says, speaking of the Seder, have you ever noticed that everyone has their own way of reading the Haggadah? Some people go slow, some people go fast, some people add their own commentary. It's like we're all reading from a different script. And then there's that one person who always wants to sing Dayenu, like it's a Broadway show. Enough already! But, that was one of them. I like that one. It was just like classical Jerry Seinfeld. For me, it was beautiful, right? And the truth is that, the Dayenu is that one like apex expression of Haggadah, where everyone kind of like wakes up a little bit. You've gone through a big chunk of the Haggadah, and you're telling the story. You're going through these 15 stanzas of the Dayenus. Enough. And let's talk about it a little bit. So the Dayenu story begins with Kama ma'alot tovot l'makom alenu. How many degrees of good did God bestow upon us? And it starts listing off all these things. And the truth is, if you look carefully at the Dayenu, it's broken up into 3 sections. The first 5 stanzas are leaving Mitzrayim. The middle 5 are about the miracles. And the last 5 are us being with God. And we constantly go through these different ideas of, it would have been enough if we would have just had this, right? If you had just taken us out of Mitzrayim, if we didn't have to see the splitting of the sea, and you keep asking, why are we doing this? What is the Dayenu really about? And the truth is, in the same way that the halach ma'aniyah is an exercise in gratitude, right? I believe that Dayenu itself is also about gratitude. There's a deep correlation between gratitude and boundaries. And we'll try to uncover that tonight, Bezrat Hashem. The Mishnah in Sukkot tells us there were 15 different ma'alot, 15 different stairs that came from the courtyard, from the Israel's courtyard to the women's courtyard in the Beit HaMikdash, corresponding to the 15 songs of ascent in Tehillim, Shela Ma'alot. So Rav Chisda, who said that these 15 songs of ascent represent the time where David HaMelech was digging up different drain pipes in Yerushalayim, right, to kind of clear out the sewage system. And when he did this, there was some water pipe broke, and this water was so powerful that it would have flooded all of Yerushalayim, as the Midrash says, and therefore he started these 15 words of ascent were sung to help stop the water, spiritually speaking. And there's this concept of David using these 15 different keys or tunes to slow down the spread of something that was bursting out. This concept of Shamar le'olam dai. In the same way that God says to the world, enough, right? If you're a student of physics, you know that there's something called the universe begins, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'haaretz. In the beginning, God creates expansiveness in the universe. And that expansiveness slows down when God says, die, enough. Right? You can't have a reality that does not have the ability to say, stop, enough. Okay? David realizes this. He uses 15 steps, and therefore we use 15 steps in our conversation about building boundaries. The Dayenu is an extension of this concept of the 15 steps that we had in Yerushalayim. Now, when God created the world, right, the world was going to continue to expand like a balloon. This is the Gemara on Chagiga, right? And it says that when God said to the world, right, stop, Shamar, die, Shamar le'olam die, that's when everything stopped. And at that moment, God created the seas, He created the oceans, and He ends up creating dry land, and this is boundary. In the same way that the beach is the boundary to the oceans, without the beaches, the waters would know no boundaries. And water represents this desire, this drive for expansiveness, whereas the land represents the boundaries necessary to push back the waters. And there's this constant idea, like we see it in nature. We see that the universe itself is reminding us that there's two things that are super important. Number one, that you and I need to live in a world of balance. How do we see that? Well, if the earth was a half a mile closer to the sun, there would be no water on planet Earth. If the earth was a half a mile further away from the sun, there still would be no water on planet Earth. Closer, it would be all vapor. Further, it would all be ice, but not in a liquid form. Life could only express itself in a reality where there's something called equilibrium and balance. You are made up of water. Hashem creates a world, a reality, a physical reality, to express what you and I are meant to do. We're meant to find balance. But you can't find balance in a world without boundaries. The world exists with boundaries. This perfect amount of space between us and the sun, right, allows us to have something called balance in our world. The beaches represent the borders and boundaries necessary for life to develop and evolve on this planet. Okay? What is the Dayenu at its core? It's a reminder that without rules and regulations, you and I would fall into an abyss of depression. And we all know this is true. We all know that I can't do whatever I want whenever I want. I don't have the freedom to go out into my car right now and be like a crazy daredevil and drive down the street without a seatbelt, right? It's against the law, right? There's a limitation to how fast I can go in different areas. And if I want to go fast, I have to pay that crazy luxury tax, that fine, it's called a ticket, for going faster down certain blocks. But this is our reality. There's always going to be something that's there that's holding you back. Now, you have a choice to make. You could either see the boundaries, the limitations as a form of slavery, which is your prerogative, or you could see it as an opportunity to break free. Now, what are the things that often hold us back as individuals? The things that make us great are the places where we invest in ourselves. It's the place where we actually create the boundaries. The dieting, the exercising, the shiurim, the classes, thinking, learning, reading. It's taking a step away from the world that you and I are in. That's where greatness comes from. The whole of Chumash is like this. Pasuk tells us that when God came to the Avot, right, he only expressed himself in the terms of Shakai, Sha'amar Dai. That was the way the Avot understood him, through restrictions, right? And Bnei Israel, when Moshe meets Hashem for the first time, his name is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, talking about the future, possibility, opportunity. But when God introduces himself to Moshe, he's not saying, this is my name and this is no longer my name. He's saying, that's my name and this is my name. That when you live in a world of boundaries, you can get stuck in saying, okay, well, I'm not going anywhere. It's too much, it's too difficult. Rabbi, Shabbat is too hard for me. I can't do Shabbat because I can't live for 25 hours without my phone. Do you know how many kids today are literally, addicted? Addiction is the only word to describe on their phone. They're addicted to their phones. I have I've shared this before. I have a son who travels from the city back to Long Island for schooling, and I asked him what's it like on the bus, when you're driving home? Because from my day, when it was you're on the bus, the way back home was like WrestleMania 5, and at the back of the bus where the party was at, and everyone was cheering, and it was a big thing, and I'm like what happens on your bus? Who's the king of the ring? And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, is it loud on the bus? He's like, no. He's like, it's really quiet. I'm like, what do you mean it's quiet on the bus? He's 11 years old. I'm not sure if any of you have bus memories, but he's like, on the bus, no one speaks. It's quiet and everyone's on a phone. How sad is that? An 11-year-old kid should be on a bus where no one's talking anymore? That's the saddest thing in the world. And my son's the only one that has a book because I don't let him have a phone. right? But I said to him, why don't you put your book down and just try to talk to the person next to you? He's like, I've tried. They're too glued to their phones. That means that an 11-year-old, if he's making a choice between building a friendship and a relationship, would rather build a relationship with his phone than with a person, right? 35% of males in Japan over the age of 30 would rather be married to a robot than a person. So, that's okay. I appreciate that. Right? It's terrifying. But like we have this thing called technology, and we have all these new freedoms. We have no idea where to create the boundaries. But right now, you and I are living in a time where we're witnessing society literally fall apart because there are no boundaries. And this is part of the postmodernistic philosophy. Well, nothing can be defined. It's an attack on all things that are defined. Everything from your gender to your age to the patriarchy, religion certainly, the idea of rules, ridiculous. But there cannot be a society, a functioning, healthy society, or for that matter, individuals for ourselves without living with boundaries. God is the God of boundaries. The Seder, yeah, it's hard. Well, what are we telling at that story? The story is of a people who traded a set of boundaries for another set of boundaries. And maybe we could understand this idea better. Torah tells us, "V'haluchot ma'aseh Elokim hema," right? Torah tells us that the tablets were the work of God. "Hamichtav michtav Elokim hu charut al haluchot." The writing was inscribed, God's writing was inscribed on the tablets. And the Mishnah in Perkei Avot says, like we read this, you all are familiar with this, "Haluchot ma'aseh Elokim hema, michtav michtav Elokim hu charut al haluchot, al tikra charut ela cherut." It's talking about freedom. Well, we understand now what the correlation is. You see, the Seder of Pesach isn't just a story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. When the month of Av comes in, what do we say? Mishenichnas Adar. What do we say? Ma'abim b'simcha. So, is the simcha over now because it's Chodesh Nisan? Right? We say Mishenichnas Adar, Ma'abim b'simcha, because of the month of Nisan. So really, Adar is in preparation for the month of Nisan. We say, the Hasidim say, Mishnichnas Adar, Aleph. If the Aleph is Aluf, is God. When the Aleph Dar, when the Aleph lives in your heart, Marbim Besimcha. When God lives in your heart, you increase your joy. We don't stop saying Tachnun in the month of Adar, but we stop saying in Nisan. The whole month of Adar, the happiness, the simcha of Adar, is in preparation for this month. And what are we being besimcha about? We're being besimcha about this idea that we finally found a set of rules that expresses man's ability to reach their full potential. Think about that. You know, I say this and I love saying it because it's so true. Judaism wasn't designed for losers. It was designed for peak performers that want to live a life of excellence. And it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to demand more from us. It's meant to drive you to think. It's meant to push you. Wake up early in the morning, come late to classes, think before you do something, work on gratitude, work on patience, work on humility, work. That's all there is here. But that's real freedom. The freedom to express the greatness that is latent within each of you, that is the Simcha of Adar. And by the way, it happens when? Not in the month of Adar, it happens in the month of Nisan. Because Nisan is the month of miracles. It takes a miracle to get us to change. It takes a miracle for us to recognize that these beliefs that we've inherited for so long, I mean, it's not too long ago, it's 3,333 years ago about when Matan Torah happened. Yetziat Mitzrayim happened 3,000 years ago. And we're still telling that story today. We see what's happening in America today. I'm not sure if you heard the news today. It was a horrible shooting. It's really sad. We still don't know the story there. What's happening in Israel today? It's crazy. What's happening in Russia, Ukraine, right? It's crazy. Craziness. No, the attack wasn't in Israel. The attack was here. Just what we're saying, talking about the protests in Israel, right? Talking about how the world has lost its sense of direction and clarity. Because in a world where there are no clear boundaries, you are left with chaos. This is what the Dark Ages were about. When the Roman Empire fell apart, there was no one there to preserve the rule of law. In a society without laws, there are no transgressions. In a society where there are no people there to go ahead and protect rules, laws, you have chaos, my friends. The Seder is about bringing order into a world that's gone insane. That's what Judaism represents. Judaism represents this idea that we want to bring order back. And it's hard because it doesn't always fit in with my cultural experience. So Rabbi, come on, I know you're trying to sell like Shabbat to me again. And I'm trying to sell it hard. Because we live in a time today, in 2023, where it's so obvious that we need Shabbat in our lives. You need Shabbat in your life. You need to have 25 hours where you learn to create a boundary. You need that time. It's for your own health. Relationships, you want to create boundaries there too. You can't do whatever you want with whoever you want. Many years ago, I took a group to South Africa, and I was there with a friend of mine who actually worked as a rabbi there. And the South African government actually has a rabbinical position that's part of the government. There's a rabbi position there. And they were working really, really hard to try to figure out how to deal with some of the issues that the young children in South Africa were having. We visited this area called Alexandria, which was a real shanty town, 300,000 Afrikaans living there. 65% of that population were HIV, AIDS. It was very sad, very sad. Most people living in tin huts, a very hard place. And part of the issue that this particular area had, and this is true for most of South Africa, people don't realize that the average age expectancy in South Africa is still today only 45. It's like one of the lowest in the world. And so like the officials in South Africa are trying to figure out like how do we assess what the issue is? Like how do we get these people to like grow and change, stop these bad habits? And part of the issue is that because of apartheid and slavery, they feel that they're entitled to all sorts of stuff. I shouldn't have to work. The white man, the oppressor, has to pay for all the things. I'm not getting a job. I'm not doing any of these things. There has to be some kind of retribution for all the things all the trouble that we went through. But there's no sense of personal responsibility and empowerment. Here are your rules. So what they did was, this was several of the rabbis in South Africa got together and said, well, why don't we create something called the Bill of Responsibilities? That with every right comes a set of responsibilities. So this conversation was happening throughout South Africa, and one of my friends was asked to come to a public school to talk about AIDS and HIV. This is a public school of 2,000 South Africans. And what he did was he started reading off statistics, kind of like what I did earlier today, about HIV, relationships, and so on and so forth. And he asked each person in the room, he said, I'm going to pass out a piece of tape, and I want you to take this piece of tape, and I want you to stick it on your hand. Put it on your hand, take it off, and give it to the next person. And as he's going through this, after 5 minutes of reading his stats, some girl raised her hand. She says, Rabbi, this tape doesn't work anymore. Can you give me another piece? So she brings up the tape again to the front of the audience. She says, you see this? He says, this tape is like your body. The more times you try to stick to other people, the less the adhesive works. The Torah speaks about boundaries because it understands the nature of human beings, that when we're overexposed to any stimuli for long periods of time, we become numb to it. It's not there to take away your pleasure. It's not there to reduce your happiness. It's the opposite. The Dayenus are about the boundaries that we need to live a life of meaning and gratitude. Right? It's a life of happiness, health, and success. That's what the Seder is about. I'm going to end with this idea. There's I asked ChatGPT to give me 5. I did this. This is me cheating right now, but it's like this. It says that I asked it. I said, explain to me how setting boundaries can be used to promote happiness and gratitude. So I didn't say 5. It just did these 5, and I saw the 5. I read through it, and I actually thought it was interesting because I think there's a lot of depth over here. And I'll end with this idea. Actually, I want to end with something else before I end with that idea. One last thing. So he says as follows. ChatGPT. I said he says as follows. This is ChatGPT. Okay, this is version 4.2, I think, right? Or 4.1. It says like this. Number one, if you want to live a life of boundaries, right? We all agree. Does everyone agree that setting up your boundaries are, I think that's what you get it. Okay, setting boundaries are healthy and happy, okay? Fine. So, number one, if you want to go ahead and, how do you set up boundaries for yourselves? Number one, identify your needs. If you cannot articulate what you need, okay, you can't set effective boundaries. First, you have to identify your own needs and priorities, and this means being super clear about what you're comfortable with and what you're not. First, you have to find your truth. Okay? First, you have to clarify what your mission and what your goal is. If that's not clear to you, then you can't live in a life of boundaries. The first part is setting up the rules. The Seder begins with, this, just tell you exactly what's going to be there, very clear. The Seder is about order. This is beginning to end. It's all there. Your 15 steps are right there. You know exactly what the whole thing's going to be about. It's super clear. Number one, the first step to building boundaries in your lives today is by identifying your needs. Number two, you got to communicate clearly, right? It's not enough for you to go ahead and identify your boundaries, but you have to communicate it to others, right? You got to live your truths. You got to live the things that you're clear about. That means you got to live your goals. It's not enough to go ahead and state them. Now it's actually actively doing it. Then, number three, he says, is be consistent, right? You got to be consistently reinforcing your boundaries so that others know what to expect from you. Not just about for you, but everyone around you should know that I keep kosher. I keep kosher. I am an Orthodox Jew. It's clear. There's certain things I don't do, right? I was skiing a couple of days last week with Rabbi Mizrahi, and there's a lot of Jews out there, a lot of outreach opportunities, and we're giving classes on the slopes, picking up people along the way, and there's one lady there who is going through a hard time, a divorce and whatever it is, and we gave her a lot of chizuk, and she's like, I just want to give you a hug. I'm like, she's like, I know you're Orthodox. I'm like, that's right. It's got to be clear who you are and what you do. You got to build your habits, and habits can only be built through repetition. I got to say the same tefillah over and over again, the same bracha over and over again, the same seder over and over. Yes, repetition breeds excellence. Right? You want boundaries? Okay, you got to be repetitive about it. Number four, practice self-care. Taking care of yourself is essential to maintaining healthy boundaries. Right? That means setting aside time for self-care activities such as exercise, relaxation, and hobbies. Right? Or I would say pray, meditate, breathe. Create a space during your day where you can pull away from the normal automatic response of your brain and say, I have 15 minutes where I'm just shutting off. I'm just like, here, me, Borei Olam, me, God, alone. And lastly, seek support. You need a community. You can't do it alone. You need someone to do this with. You can't build gratitude and boundaries by yourselves. Find someone to do it with. Being part of a kehillah. I'm not sure if you know this, but there's Monday nights classes. There's classes during the week. There's all kinds of things you could participate in. There's a trip to Egypt that's happening sometime later if you want to be part of the community. There's all these things that are happening. They're always there. They're there for you to enjoy and to participate in. Nathan Sharansky is one of the most famous refuseniks. Okay? He was arrested when he was a young man, 27 years old, July 2nd. It was a day before the day after he got married, he was arrested. And he was super famous for when he was freed, certainly. He played an interesting role in Israeli politics and government. At the beginning of the coronavirus, when many Jews around the world were doing Pesach Seder for the first time in isolation, people they interviewed him and said, like, how did you do it? Like, you were sitting in solitary confinement for so long. You must have had a Pesach Seder in the Gulag. How did you do it? Like, give us advice. Like, what does a guy in solitude, confinement do to have a normal Pesach? So this is a quote. This is what he says. Okay? He says, he said that, first of all, you know that he was served nothing but 3 pieces of dry bread and 3 cups of water per day. That's what he got. He was in solitary confinement something like 410 days. And I think according to Russian law, you're not allowed to be in solitary confinement for more than 10 days. Okay, they tried killing him psychologically. So this is a quote. He says, I decided my 3 cups of water would be my wine, and my 3 pieces of dry bread would be my matzah, and my salt would be my maror. Right? He said this. He says, I found out that this is a great place to feel the unique struggle of the Jewish people, to be connected with every Jew in the world, and to enjoy thinking about that this year we were slaves and next year we will be free people in Jerusalem. Here's a guy in solitary confinement. He has every reason to say, I'm out. I'm not doing this. I'm hedged. Right? Enough. Right? I want to do something different. But he says, no, I took this concept of Pesach, I brought it with me into my world. I took whatever little meager things were left to me, my 3 pieces of bread, my water, my little bit of salt, and I transformed that into a Seder for myself. He took nothing and he made it something that is meaningful. He transformed a place of complete isolation, loneliness, and depression, and he used his mind to connect to the world around him. Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. He concluded the interview by emphasizing that even if we are not with our family on the Seder night, we are still connected, for we are one big family, a people with a shared history, a shared future, and a very special role in this world. That's what this Pesach is. I don't know where you're going to be. I don't know what you're going through. I know that if you're here watching in the room or wherever it is, I know that most people today in the United States are struggling. People are going through a lot of hardships. And I know that life can be challenging. Use this Pesach as a way of resetting your reality. Believe in something called hope. Tomorrow is not the same day as today. But nothing's going to change unless you bring order into your world. If you're doing that same thing over and over again, you're just stuck in a cycle of madness. How do you break out of it? Bring order to your life. How? By recognizing that the way to real, true simcha, a place of real happiness, is by bringing the boundaries, the borders into your world. Where do you look? Don't look too far. You have a system that works, right? 3,300 years of history. No matter where you find Jews on the planet, you'll find Jews that built societies. You found Jews that invented, created, loving families, people that were interested in giving back to humanity, creating better, bigger, greater future for tomorrow. Where did that come from? Came from a world filled with laws, things that they practiced, repeated over and over again. The things that you and I often find to be difficult with our Judaism is actually the path to your freedom. Have a Chag Kosher V'Sameach, everybody. Thank you so much for listening and joining. We'll come to you.